In this usually occurring position, white can achieve a win only by following a combination with the sacrifice of knight and a pawn. Knight to d4, the purpose of this move will be apparent shortly. If black plays pawn to a2, then white responds with knight to b3, and white wins easily. But if white plays knight to c2, then black wins by playing knight to e3, pawn to g7, knight takes knight, pawn to g8 queen, pawn to a1 queen, black has an upper hand. If white starts with pawn to g7, then it is of no use as black responds with pawn to a2, pawn to g8 queen, pawn to a1 queen, black has a slightly upper hand. Therefore, after knight to d4, black captures the white knight on d4. Here comes another surprise, pawn to c5 check. Instead, if white plays pawn to g7, black will continue by playing pawn to a2, g8 queen, a1 queen, and black has an upper hand. Black responds by capturing the pawn with his d-pawn. Instead, if he captures with his king, then pawn to a7, pawn to a2, pawn to a1 queen, white wins easily. If black plays king to a7, then pawn to c6, pawn to a2, pawn to c7, pawn to a1 queen, pawn to c8 queen, queen to a5 check, queen to c7 check, queen takes c7 check, king takes c7, knight to e3, pawn to g7, knight to d5 check, king to d8, and white queens his pawn. If black plays king takes a6, then pawn to c6, pawn to a2, pawn to c7, pawn to a1 queen, pawn to c8 queen check, king to b5, pawn to g7, queen to a2, king to e7, and white queens his g-pawn and wins easily. Then white continues with pawn to g7, pawn to a2, pawn to g8 queen, pawn to a1 queen, queen to b3 check. If white had not sacrificed knight and pawn, this strong move would not have been possible. King takes a6, king to a7, queen to a5 check. Instead, if black plays king to a5, queen to b6 check, king to a4, queen to a6 check, king to b4, queen takes queen, and white wins. White responds to black's check with king to c6, queen to b4, queen to a2 check, queen to a5, queen to c4 check, king to a7, queen to f7 check, queen to c7, queen takes c7 check, king to a6, queen to b6 checkmate. Thank you, please like, share and subscribe. Also comment in the comment section below. Have a nice day.